Hello, everyone, and I hope everyone can hear me. Welcome to the first webinar of our work package 3 of the Nautilus project. The webinar, I'll just run a bit through the main, through the agenda of today's webinar. The topic of the webinar, as you know, is student engagement techniques. So we will be basically talking about how we try to make our students more active, the challenges in doing that, and how we address those challenges successfully or less successfully. But that's the point of the webinar, to exchange these experiences and ideas. So the main topic will be this: how we will approach this. We will the three group leaders will be giving some I wouldn't say a presentation, but a few ideas on the topic from the perspective of the method they are tackling. Followed, of course, by a discussion in which I really encourage all of you to get involved. By writing your input, ideas, or by speaking after we have finished. So that is more or less how we're going to go about today. So very short presentations, or just a few indicative ideas on how we deal with student engagement in the three methods: PBL, e-learning, and simulations, and then a discussion. And then I would like to leave the very last part of the webinar for a bit of more admin side, seeing how the online, trying to assess together how the online training has been going so far. Indeed, it has been a slower phase through the summer period, the summer holiday period. But now in September it should be slowly picking up, and hopefully we will be able to make the most of it in the next weeks. So we'll be talking about that towards the end as well, seeing the ways how we could do it better, improve, be more engaged in the online training exercise, because it is a very important part of our project. So without any further ado, I would go into the topic of the webinar, and I would like to ask who of you would like to start with a few ideas. Simon, Heidi, or should I start? Whatever you prefer.
Yeah, I'm happy to start if that's helpful. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, good. Okay. The reason I'm happy to start by talking about student engagement is that obviously for simulations, student engagement is essential. That if the students don't turn up, if they don't take part, then it's not only a problem for them, but it's a problem for all the students in the class. And so it's a really important question of how do we get students wanting to do this and doing this in a way that is constructive and meaningful for them. As I suggested in the questions that I circulated amongst my group, one of the real problems with simulations, and I think it's true for PBL as well, is that what we're offering with the simulation game is something which is rather different from a normal class. We're not giving them a clear line of what will happen. We're saying, here's a situation, here's an environment in which you can do lots of different things, and I don't know what you will do, and I don't know how it will turn out exactly. So there's a lot of margin for things to go in lots of different directions. And when you have that, what I often find is that students get a bit anxious about this. They worry that they're doing the wrong thing, or they worry that because you're not telling them what to do exactly, that they find it hard then to take ownership of their learning. And it becomes very much more about students learning rather than about teaching. So one of the things I think we have to think about a lot is the ways in which we can reassure students that it's fine, that it's not a problem, that there is this uncertainty in what they do, and that the whole process is one which is about their inputs. It's about accepting that sometimes things don't work out. I know we're going to talk in another seminar, a webinar about coping with failure. But in common with PBL, if we can accept and acknowledge that that's an uncertain kind of environment, then I think that that's the first big step that we can overcome. Uh, the advantage, obviously, with using seminars is that it's something which tends to be very engaging, that students doing something a bit different, they have a role, they can act in ways that they might not normally want to act. So, they can say things that they might feel hesitant about saying.
We'll jump a little bit, although the topic is pretty much similar and the challenges are similar. The environment is quite different. So what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes is how we engage students in the online and blended learning environment. Being a quite different type of environment than the traditional regular classroom that we are all used to, both students and professors, we have to pay a bit more attention to this aspect, to how we are in touch with the students, how we know that they are active, that they are learning, that they participate in our activities, in the activities we design. So yes, that is a factor we have to pay even more attention to than when we are teaching in the real classroom. Because when you are learning online, there can easily be a feeling of isolation coming about and sometimes overwhelming you as a student, but also the teacher. So and for the teacher, there is also the fact that the students are a bit anonymous. I mean, we know their names, but we only know their names. Sometimes we never get to see them. And from the other side, the same. So actually, to overcome, these are the specificities of the environment. And I think these have to be kept in mind when setting the scene for any online or indeed blended learning course. Therefore, my main point, my first point is that we have to design engagement methods that run throughout the course. And also we have to think already how we want to engage the students from the very moment we start designing the course. And even from the moment we choose the topic or the subtopic or the kind of specific issues we are addressing in our course, they have to be as relevant to the student population we are addressing as possible. They have to be as much linked to what they are already familiar with, to what they are concerned about. There has to be some link there, so you kind of catch them from the very beginning. Only then can you see how you tackle this topic and how you engage them in the process. And how you can do that, of course, you can devise a lot of collaborative work, tasks. I'm not going to go very much in depth at the moment. I think we will discuss this in a second or after all the presentations. But the idea is that we encourage a lot of interaction. And interaction can be between different actors. So you can have student-teacher interaction, in which we interact with the students, we answer their questions, they comment, and we comment back, and so on. And then student-student interaction, where they work together, so the students working together on a task or helping each other, commenting on each other's work, peer reviewing each other's work, but also student content interaction. Basically having students contribute to a certain part of the course content. And that's also very important. It's something that is a bit, the other two forms of interaction are more talked about, more addressed, but the student content interaction, and I think in online, in the online environment, this is quite important, that the students also interact with the content and see a bit how they can change it, they can improve it, they can enrich it, and they can work together to do that. But of course, this entails another issue. We have two types of e-learning. We have synchronous e-learning and asynchronous e-learning. What we are doing now in this webinar is synchronous e-learning. So where we have all the participants all together in one virtual room. And basically we have the feeling that we are almost like in a real classroom. Again, we don't see each other. We are not all visible to everyone, but still it feels more like a regular classroom than when we are just studying on an e-learning platform. And that's the asynchronous e-learning mode. So according to either the synchronous or the asynchronous mode, the engagement techniques can be different. I mean, in the online, in a webinar form like now, we will have interaction, like hopefully we will have in a few minutes, where all of you can ask questions, make comments, we get back, and so on. So that's already more likely to create engagement. Whereas in the asynchronous mode, as you already probably noticed on our e-learning platform during the the online training course, it is a bit more difficult. It takes a bit more from both the students and the professors to engage, to get engaged. The professors have to design activities that really engage the students, ask questions that will be challenging, or give tasks where they would kind of create a competitive environment where the students will want to add something and give their input, not only for the sake of the grade in the final stage, but also for creating a real discussion. But it takes effort. It takes effort and time from both the students and the professors. And also, here a very important point is the communication. There has to be really clear communication and expectation management from both sides, but especially from the professor's side. Of course, there will be email contact from the students. Sometimes that can border harassment. There can be a lot of emails at all times of day and night. But of course, if the rules of the game are very clearly defined from the very beginning, and the expectations are managed, well managed, the student knows in how much time he or she can expect a response. And the professor also knows when the deadline is for a task submission or so. So I think it's very important that there is a clear communication channel. It's even more important than in face-to-face classroom, because there you see the students, you can just make a small announcement in the beginning or the end of the class, but here there has to be very good and clear, sometimes better in written form communication between the students and the professor. And of course the feedback. If we want to engage the students, okay, we give them tasks, they do what we ask them, ideally. But the most important thing is not that we just grade this in the end and thank them for participation, but that we do give them formative feedback, so that they actually know what went right, what went wrong, what were the strong parts of their input, what were the weaker ones where they have to still work and improve, and so on. This is extremely important. We have to always take time to do that as well. If we expect the students to be engaged, we have to be willing to put in time to give meaningful feedback. Of course, just a few more things. As I said, we will probably discuss later what are the possibilities, what are the possible ideas for engaging students. You have, of course, forums, and a good news I will already give you is that our forums will start working very soon. They're actually available at the moment, so we will start communicating via the forums. And I think that's a very good thing, because we will be able to engage you, or to engage with you on a more regular basis, and especially in a more inclusive way. Webinars, of course, are a way of engaging students. Again, having them all in one room, albeit virtual, it's still a very good idea. But also throughout your course, you can have different assignments, individual or group assignments. You can have quizzes. You can have, again, as I said, all sorts of sometimes little things that can create quite a big impact in keeping your students there, having them with you. Just the last thing to keep in mind before I hand back to Simon, because I see that he's back there. Students are very different. Again, in online environment or blended environment, we don't really even see them. So it's very important that in the beginning of the course, we get to know them, or we get to know each other pretty well. Students are very different, their learning styles are very different, and their situations are very different. A lot of them work, because being an online course facilitates them having work, daytime work, and then studying aside from that. Or studying something else and then studying or your online course on the side. So they have different situations. Some of them want to engage more. Some of them feel like they learn more by working with others. Some of them don't need so much hand holding, and they're very independent learners, and they want to learn at their own pace. And I think these decisions, of course, we cannot please everyone at the same time, but these decisions and learning styles have to be at least accommodated to a certain extent, or we have to at least give it a thought. Of course, this again implies quite a bit of effort to manage all these differences, but it pays off, because in the end, you don't want to force anyone to engage, because then the engagement will not be productive. But you also want to do your best for the ones that do want to work in a more active way. I think that's it for my side for the moment.
What I can hear from what Alex has been talking about, and just kind of thinking back to what I was saying earlier on, I think it's a quite different situation. Again, that because students are present, usually, you don't lose that face-to-face contact. Uh, if anything, the issue is the opposite one, which is that because students in simulations often become very engaged emotionally, they often find that it's hard to come out of the learning environment, and so you can still be in the same room, but they're very focused on what they're doing, that they're only thinking about that one activity, and it's very hard sometimes to reach them, particularly if we're doing something that's a bit longer. That, you know, if you're doing a day-long activity or something that goes over several days, it can be quite problematic. So I think really we need to sort of think about these sort of things. I guess what ties together what Alex is saying about blended learning with what I'm saying about simulations, and I think also largely about how it is with problem-based learning, is that students are in unusual situations. And so maybe what I'm getting from this is that we need to think a bit about how the situation is unusual for students, and thinking about the ways that we can reach out to them. And particularly, I think one of the things that we have as a problem with simulations is bringing the class back out of the simulation into an academic environment. That the engagement that they have, the disconnection from the outside world can be very high. And so we need to think very carefully about the debriefing and the feedback that we give to help students make the connections academically that are already there, but perhaps they haven't really thought about very much. So often, I think engagement is for me, is an issue of dealing with the uncertainty at the beginning. So once we get going, often students find it very interesting and exciting, and so they get on with it. And so thinking about the work that I'm doing with the simulation group, often one of the problems also as a teacher is that until you've run a simulation, you can't have a sense of what it might be like. And even when you do the same game again and again, each time it can be different. So I think that's a challenge. But the condition of a simulation game is one of almost permanent uncertainty. And I think if we don't think about that, then I think that can be quite difficult. It's one of the reasons why often I say to people who are using simulations, a really helpful thing is to have played the game yourself. Maybe not in full, but at the very least to sit down with a colleague or a friend or a family member and to say, well, why don't we just try and see how this might work out? You know, what would you do if you were in this role? What would you do? How might this work out? What might be the problems? Because then we can be more reassuring to students and saying, okay, this is how we think it's going to go. We're not sure, but I've got a fairly good idea of it. I think that's probably all I want to say, because I don't want to chance my luck with this computer not working. So again, to pass back to all of you the questions, I think would be probably the most useful thing.
Thank you, Simon. I would like to ask everyone now if there are questions. Please type them in the chat box, or ask them with the microphones if you have if you can do that.
Okay, let's take the two questions from Anatoly and from Max. Let's take Anatoly's question about whether students like particular types of simulations. Uh, no, actually, I think students they enjoy a whole range of things. And one of the things I think I talked about in Brussels was that simulations are so varied, so different that actually it's very hard to come to anything that looks like what a simulation has to be like. I think the things that students like are something where perhaps they get to do something a bit out of the ordinary, a bit different, where they have uh, a role or an objective that they can work to. I think with some of the games that I've used, I've gone to a much more minimal kind of arrangement, and a large part of the game is about students learning how to make their own rules and learning what to do. I think that's really a next step, and it's probably not so useful for thinking about teaching European studies particularly. So I think structure is something that is helpful. That if students know what they're trying to achieve, uh, they think they've got a possibility of doing it, then I think that's often what they find useful. I also find, and it goes a bit into Max's question, that giving students a role that isn't like the role that they would have in real life can be one that's very useful. So when we're talking about European studies, often the institutions have got a very political element to them, and you can give students roles which don't match their own personal attitudes. Um, so uh, you you really then can say, okay, well, I'm going to give you a role which is nothing like your personal preference, and which they then have to suddenly take on a persona, and that can be very good for the passive students in bringing them out of their shell, making them feel comfortable with saying things that otherwise they might not really want to say. So it makes it less about them as a person and more about the role that they have. Now, that doesn't always work, but actually it works a lot of the time. That, if you've got if you've got maybe different member states, you can say, well, go with usually in my case, it's make them the British um, representative, and then they can just be very difficult about everything. Or you can say you make them the German, and they feel they can be bossy to everyone. So here, all these kind of things, I think, are useful ways in which you can create engagement for those kind of students. And again, if you talk to them with a larger game, you can certainly talk to them about, well, what role should we have, and what do people think would be interesting to do. I think you can do that as well. But it gives them a stake in the design of the game, and it gives them the opportunity, a feeling of ownership, which then can often make them want to make it work in a more active kind of way than is otherwise the case. What other questions have we got? Okay. Ivano, I've kind of talked about some of those questions in the different kind of places. Yeah, I think, as I've talked about, one of the things is that simulations are very flexible, and so there are some ones that you can get off the internet or things like that, but usually it's not going to be quite right for what you want. So it goes back to this other point that in terms of making students want to be part of your game and your simulation, actually doing something yourself or making something that is just right for you is a really useful thing, rather than saying, well, we're doing this, but it's not really right, but I can't be bothered to change it. Doesn't really give a good feeling to students that you really care about the environment that you've got them. So I think that's a useful. kind of thing to think about. What else have we got? Talked about assessment. We'll talk about assessment in a later webinar as well. Okay. Okay, let's look at Annetta's point briefly, talking about students being competitive. There's one solution, which is that you make a game which can't be won. That often the games I run, it's very hard to say it's that there is a clear winner. You can do that quite easily because a lot of things that the European Union does or other institutions do don't actually come to anything. They don't produce any good outcomes. So it's not so unrealistic to have a European institution that doesn't achieve anything. The other way is your assessment regime, that students respond to incentives for assessment. So if you say the assessment is about who wins, then yes, students will be keen to win. But actually, I don't think that's a very good way of doing it, because I think often with these kind of things, some people can't win, but they have to have weak positions. So often my assessments are about asking students to reflect on what they've done. So, what did you do well? What did you do badly? Did you make the most of your situation? And if you can do that, then actually that's a very useful kind of activity, because then it's not about whether you won or lost. It's about, do you know what happened here? Did you do all the things you could do? And what would you do differently next time? So those are useful kinds of lessons, because then it also connects it to the rest of the students' learning and saying, here is something that you can benefit from as you carry on. So to Galina, yes, you can use simulations as part of PBL. Maybe one of the Maastricht people can talk about that a little bit. But yeah, certainly you can structure something around a simulation game, which I think is perfectly sensible and possible. Yeah, again, I said this in Brussels, simulations are not the only thing you should be using. You can't teach a whole degree or a whole module, well, maybe a module, but you can't do a whole degree just doing simulation games. So it's good for some things, it's bad for other things. And again, the engagement that you get from students because they're doing a simulation is partly because they don't often do simulations. If you do them all the time, then students, especially if it's the same kind of game every time, we're doing a council game or we're doing a European Parliament game again, that gets rather boring. And it's like anything, it's part of a range of techniques that can be brought. I think anything other than, unless you're doing a course just about, say, negotiation techniques or about power relations or something like that, really quite specific, I think that would be the only case where you could do a whole course just with simulations. And even then, you still would need to have lectures around it, so you could explain what you're doing, and then you could have a debrief as well. So it's part of a range of activities, and it's the kind of thing you can slot in different kinds of ways. Yes. So I'll stop talking because I can see Heidi and Alex are back, and I'll have a look at the rest of the questions. I might write some replies. Okay.
Thanks, Simon. It seems to be a really hot topic, and as usual. And this is also an example of good engaging e-learning exercise. It's a webinar, a synchronous e-learning exercise where we have a very challenging topic relevant to everyone, and everyone is engaging, you see. So that's a good example. But if anyone has now questions also for, well, still for Simon, of course, we're not going to ban those, but if you have questions also about e-learning or blended learning or PBL, just note about Heidi. She cannot, unfortunately, participate in the webinar with voice and video because her computer doesn't work well, but she can type. So if you have any questions for her, please address them in chat, and she can answer there. But until then, any questions for any of us, or any comments, not even questions, but comments, discussion points are more than welcome. Yes, thank you, Anatoly, for your question. Simon, I will try to answer both for now. Indeed, there is quite a big, a big issue, especially on the asynchronous format, because first of all of the nature of the environment, but also because of the nature of the topic we are addressing. In political science, and European studies is the same, but in political science in general, there is a lot of text. There are a lot of texts to read, a lot of assignments, requesting a lot of reading. That takes a lot of time, of course. So how do you go about that and still keeping students motivated? Well, here it is a little bit like in the classroom as well. I mean, this issue we have also with traditional students. We ask them for the seminars to read a lot, and if it's just like that, the task, you have to read this and this text by next week, and then we'll have a seminar, then it's most likely that they will not be reading the texts, either none or very, very little from what was suggested, even if you make the text compulsory. So we are having that issue with our face-to-face students as well. And of course, this issue also appears in the online environment. However, what I think is a good idea to do in the online environment is to try to have less, to try not to have that much text, to try to kind of have a very clear structure of the course, because you're not there to explain it all the time like you are in the classroom. You meet them every week, you can explain where you are in the course and so on. So the best thing is to have a very clear structure. And then, of course, I think it's something that Pavlo is mentioning now. It's very important to have visuals. So you can explain something much better when you have a table or a scheme. So really important complex concepts where you can have a lot of reading on them. You could also just try to represent them in a slightly different way for the online environment. And that's very important. That's something I would say key when you design content for your online learning. And that's something we will be addressing with the online learning group as well. If you just put text there, you are very likely not to get the students motivated to read at all. But if you put sometimes just an image or a table or a very systematic way of representing any idea, really, or any process, then you might get them to grasp it quicker. So that's one thing. Also, the assignments. So all the text or all the kind of content that you put in there has to be relevant and useful for the student in a certain task or assignment. So of course that comes back to how you create your assignments, how you test your students, how you give them different assignments throughout the course. And that's very important, and we'll talk about this in a totally different webinar, I think in 2 months. We'll talk about assessment. That's very important. But the way you create your course and the way you structure your material to keep the students motivated, to keep the students going, it's very important, and it has to be really linked with what you're asking them to do. So if all the reading that you give them, which shouldn't be too much anyway, is directly linked, if they feel that they cannot do a certain task without the reading, then they will be reading at least part of it. But if there is no link, if they have to read a huge reading list and then move on to the next topic, then they're more likely not to read it. But that's very similar to the face-to-face as well. Then Simon, top tips. Well, no, it's a trial and error, really. Because you have different students and because it's very difficult, at least in our case, I mean, I'll talk now from our experience, it's very difficult to engage all the students. So some of them will want to study by themselves. So it's not even worth trying really, because they will not join in. So we try to keep it flexible at the moment and kind of work together with the ones that do, but also respect the others. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. A lot of communication, again, it's necessary, and I think really a lot of thought into how you design the tasks, how much time you give for each task. You have to know your student population very well. I think there you have to start, and it's not going to be it's not easy. It's usually quite challenging, but I think a lot of communication, both ways, communication, and basically a common knowledge of the goal of the course, and a common awareness of where we're going, and constant reminder of that is kind of keeping people connected. But it's usually really trial and error, and it differs from a group of students to another. You can't do the same thing with different groups of students. So. Simon, I also just thought of a question I wanted to ask you. Actually, it's from our experience with e-learning, with simulations. How do you overcome the situation when students don't really feel like engaging because they don't feel prepared enough? A lot of students keep saying, we are not prepared, we haven't received enough information, we're just not going to do anything. So I think I think that it's important to explain that the goal is that they kind of create the game themselves, and that it can go anyway. But it's usually the kind of reluctance I find sometimes with our students, saying that we are not prepared enough, therefore we can't really meaningfully engage. Of course, then afterwards they do, but it's just the beginning.
Okay. I think there's different ways of doing this. Um, the first one is that I think we need to get students comfortable with the idea that for a lot of things you were never prepared enough. So I'm sure all of us here have been to meetings where we felt I'm not really prepared enough, but you can't say that. You just have to make do with what you've done. So partly that I think there's an element of leaving students feeling a bit underprepared, because that then helps them to appreciate the consequences of that. And if you've designed your game with enough care, then that shouldn't be a problem. But somebody who is underprepared can still do something and participate. But then they can see that if they'd been more prepared, they could have done better, because they didn't understand the issues, or they didn't understand quite what was being discussed. So I think I don't have a problem with students coming in underprepared, because they learn the lesson of that their choice of action. Second thing, and this kind of picks in with a bit with what Valentina's just writing about, is that you can structure the preparation much more clearly. So certainly for larger games, anything that's lasting half a day or more, I'd say ask the students to prepare a negotiating brief. So you say, what are you trying to achieve? Uh, what would be nice to achieve but isn't really important? What are the things that are unacceptable? Who are you going to work with? All those kind of questions, key talking points. And you can put that on a sheet of paper, And that's really good because then that forces the students to actually think sensibly about and systematically about what they need to know, what they need to be able to say. And you can either just say that's good for you to do in any case, but certainly with larger exercises that I've done, I've said, okay, before we start, you come to me, I'll read your negotiation brief, and we'll have a discussion about it. So I give them some feedback before they start and say, well, that's great, but I don't. It's not clear actually what you're going to do here. You haven't thought enough about the problems, and you really need to spend some time working on that. So you can give them some reassurance before they step into uh, the main negotiation that they're on the right kind of track. Another strategy is that you can have a preparatory exercise. So on the very large games that I've done, we'll have done very early on a short exercise where students can try something out that's related to the game but isn't everything about the game, and they can then use that as a way of understanding the consequences of under preparation or of feeling uncertain, and we can discuss what they've done there. And so using that as a way of doing it too. It all really very much depends on how much time you've got. And with small exercises, something you're doing in half an hour or an hour, there's not really much opportunity for that kind of activity. And often there's not really that much time for students to discover the consequences, the full consequences of what they've not prepared for or what they feel uncertain about. So actually, there's not so much that can go wrong in an hour with a negotiation or a simulation that is a real problem. And if you think about the games that we played in Brussels, you say, this is all the information you need to know, this is all the information you have, and so you make a virtue of the fact that people don't have enough information. So you can do lots of different things, um, and largely I think it's about trying to not make them feel more anxious than they do. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier that actually very quickly the anxiety is something that disappears very fast because very soon they're caught up in the simulation and they're not really thinking about the problems anymore. Here's a problem. I'm talking to somebody, someone's talking to me, asking for my opinion. And they just get on with it. So it's not really a real issue at the end of the day.
Okay, thanks, Simon. It did answer my question extensively. It's not that I mind having underprepared students. I actually don't mind at all. It's more how we actually design the simulation, but it's them coming to us saying that they mind being really not prepared enough and having this impression. So it's more a perception issue. But I think you explained very well, or you kind of gave some tips on how to deal with that. And I think keeping in mind the goal of the task is the main idea, and having it very clearly explained. Now I have a question here from Natalia. Indeed, as I said, there are different types of students with different types of learning styles. I wouldn't necessarily say that they would be split exactly along the lines of our teaching method. That would make it very easy. It's not that simple. It's indeed, some people learn better individually, some people learn better in groups, some people learn better by doing rather than reading. And I would say here is the distinction you are making. Indeed, simulation games are really an active method of learning. So of course, the students you are referring to are probably students that are more likely to want to practically engage in something rather than just stay back and lay back and read about it, about a certain topic. So how do we engage, how do we tackle that in e-learning? How do we engage those students? Indeed, I would say that is one of the main issues, and that's why personally I'm also more an adept of blended learning, because there you have other elements, other methods because a single method would not necessarily work perfectly in any situation. But what I would say is either create a simulation online, which I haven't done yet, and probably Simon could be of help with that. But I could find it a bit cumbersome. But if not, the idea is to address the students by giving them possibly some collaborative task where they would have to work on a scenario, where maybe they would have to build a simulation together with colleagues, or not necessarily play it, but build it, or build something else together, or design something together. So actually a collaborative work. That doesn't work by itself, and you would have to single out the students that like to work on these things, and it's not really natural selection. It's usually, I mean, it can be, but it's usually more complex than that. And even in simulation games, you have sometimes you would have the same problems. You would have students that like to be more active, that want to have a big role, and others that want to stay a bit back. So you can't always engage everyone to the same extent because they are different. But you can try. You can try. And I would say for students that learn better by doing is really trying to put emphasis more on tasks, on hands-on tasks, where they would have to design something, to work on something that has a practical implication for them. So where they would draw on something they learned or they already know, and build something that would be useful for them, either in their studies or in their work or whatever else. But again, it's that's one of the main issues, addressing the different studying styles of students. Learning about them first, you have to know your students quite well, and then addressing those different styles. It's always a challenge. But thanks for pointing that up.
To pick up on Alex's point, it's, as I said in the various things today, simulations are not going to work well for everybody, and I certainly had students who really struggle to get comfortable with that kind of environment. So again, it's not that everything should be problem-based learning or simulations or blended learning. It's that by using a mixture, you create an environment where everyone can find some way to feel comfortable with what you're doing. And I think it's that mixture of things which is really important. And certainly thinking here about what Alex was saying, certainly with the larger games, it's very easy to use elements of blended learning where you can make elements online, asynchronous. You can do a whole load of preparatory exercises in a large game in an online environment. And certainly where I've taken students to simulations in Brussels, for example, they've been working with people in a number of different countries. And so they've never actually met physically, but they've done a lot of preparation using different kinds of online tools, so that when they come, they then discover how that fits the online learning with the face-to-face learning that they're doing in the simulation. Um, and so again, it's about making students adaptable. So again, it's if you think about what we talked about in Brussels with the various stakeholders who were talking about giving students skills. I think that adaptability is something which all of these three pedagogies really can add value. That you can say, here's something which gives you a different experience. You might not have loved it, you might not have done very well in it, but you had some experience of it, and so it's not so unsettling for you. So really, it's about giving students the opportunity to see that these things are not so unusual. And again, that sort of fear of the unknown is, I think, a common theme across all of these kind of things. And it's true for me. I going to Maastricht and seeing problem-based learning in practice. I'm really interested in it, but I'm a bit scared of problem-based learning because it seems really complicated or different to me. So it's actually taken me having to see it in practice to see that actually it's not nearly as complicated or daunting as I thought it was to start with. So again, it's just that exposure which is important as much as anything else. I see Galina's just asking about how many simulations you can have in a course. Again, it depends very much on what you want to do. So I do a course which lasts one semester about negotiation, and there I probably have about 7 or 8 different games. So some of them last a couple of hours, some of them last half an hour. Um, but some weeks I'm using 2 different games. Sometimes I'm using one game. Other times I'm not using any games at all. So again, the adaptability of simulations I think is something that is a real benefit. Um, just thinking about PBL, I think that's a slightly different thing because that's a structured approach. You need to have a certain amount of space for students to be able to follow through a PBL pedagogy properly. And I think Heidi can talk about that better than I can. Well, she can. I'll talk briefly about assessment for Anna, but yeah, that is a very difficult thing. And I think I'll talk about it only in terms of student engagement. Assessment can be really useful because it can give students a real reason to get involved in a simulation. You can say, you get credit for this, you get marks. And that's usually a very good motivational tool for students. Um, the difficulty is what are you assessing? And this goes back to what I was talking about before. If you're assessing about did you win, then yeah, unless you've got a game where everybody can win, then it seems a bit unfair to do something like that. And there are very few games where everyone can win. So I think what I'd say is that actually, the assessment should be something more about the reflection on the process. That if you can develop critical thinking skills and say, I want to assess your ability to reflect on what you've done, then that's really actually where the most value lies, because then it becomes less about that one individual thing and more about the kind of skills development. The other way you can do it, of course, particularly if we're talking about something like if we're using simulations as part of a course about European studies, is you might say we use the simulation not to be as a way of helping students understand how an institution works, which goes together with some lectures or some blended learning or PBL or whatever else, and then you do a normal assessment. So the assessment isn't directly about the simulation, but rather the simulation is an opportunity for students to get a better sense of what the institution is like. Again, that requires you then to think carefully about, does your simulation actually let students understand those kind of questions, or does it not? So again, it comes very much down to what space and time you have for running a simulation and what you're doing it for. And I think that really shapes this assessment that you should be talking about.
Thank you, everyone, for your very active involvement so far. It's been really nice to read all your comments and questions. And I just wanted to ask if you have any final or semi-final questions on what different methods are concerned at this point. I think it's very useful to have this discussion in this forum where we're here at the same time and not whenever we have time to look on the platform or read our emails. So I think it's really useful. Yeah, if you have any more questions, please write them now, and we can still give you some answers. And afterwards, I will wrap up with a few thoughts on the and questions on the online training.
Just on that last point, whilst we wait to see if there's any questions. Um, using simulations is one of the things that's really good for student engagement is you can do things that are very topical. You can almost literally say, this has happened today, let's do something with it. And if you've got frameworks of simulations that are about particular kinds of institutions or processes, then actually you can say, okay, based on where we are now, today, at this minute, we've got an urgent situation. No one knows where it's going to go. Let's play it out and see where we get to. And that can be really good for students. You know, I mean, Ukraine is obviously a very good example of that. But you can do that in any country. You know, I could happily, well, not happily, but I could do a simulation about Scottish independence or devolution pretty much right now if I wanted to. If I had any students who were here, which I don't. But you know, you can do things that are totally topical, and it becomes a really good way for them to start being more active in their use of their thoughts. And so making that connection, I think, is a very positive kind of thing. And again, can overcome a lot of their anxiety about, oh, we're going to do something unusual. Instead, you can say, here's something which is topical, and you know, you frame it in terms of its topicality rather than a different kind of pedagogy.
Yes, actually, that's something that can be used also in e-learning and blended learning courses. As I said from the beginning, the more relevant the topic and the more current the topic is, the more engaged the students will be, and you yourself as a teacher, but also the students. So it has to be something that interests them, that is topical at the moment. And that's, I mean, regardless of the pedagogical method, you can easily get their interest like that, or easier. Just to answer your question, Anatoly, and then I think we are jumping or going towards the last part of the webinar. Indeed, as mentioned, I think in the beginning of the online training course, the idea was to have the 3 themes of the webinars known already from the beginning. And these are the 3 themes: the student engagement now in September, then how to deal with failure in October, and assessment in November. So these are the themes, the big themes of the webinars. However, we also thought about preparing the webinars together with our groups. So I'm not sure now which group you belong to, but the idea is that all the group leaders have posted on the online platform some questions and some very short readings, and we're trying to get you engaged, or the idea was to get you engaged and even prepare small presentations on the topics. Of course, this is much more productive for everyone, although I think our discussion today was really good and fruitful in many ways. So I think what we can do, especially, I repeat now, the forum will be working for the next webinar already, is that we have a discussion on the forum dedicated to preparing the webinar 2 weeks in advance, starting 2 weeks in advance. I think that's a very good idea, because there we can already discuss a few things. And yeah, I mean, we have posted a few questions to reflect on, and given you a space for reflection. It's true, things start a bit slower. So I think for October, we will be already much more prepared for the next webinar. Okay, then just a few more words, as we already talked about preparing for the next webinar. As I said, I find already that this one was a very, very useful one in just getting around the same virtual table and kind of talking about issues we are confronted with by using the 3 methods, and or aiming to use the 3 methods if we don't already do it. And I think it was a really nice exchange. I agree with Anatoly and with all the others that it should be, or it could be a bit more prepared, and it will happen in the next months, I believe. I also would like to draw your attention to the rest of the online training course. As I said, the synchronous sessions like this one are easier. The asynchronous part is a bit more cumbersome for everyone, because we all work. It's not our main task to participate in this training. However, this training is very important for the project and in itself, in fact. So in order to enrich our skills and knowledge about teaching methods in our discipline. And I think it's can only be of a great advantage to all of us if we participate as much as we can in the training process. Of course, the different groups. Now, I'm not sure who belongs to which group, but I'm just making some general remarks. It would be great, as I said, to try to respect as much as possible the deadlines. As I said, each group has different deadlines. You can check the platforms for those dates and different tasks. We try to scale them down so that they don't require more time than foreseen in the project for you. But as I said, maybe already in Brussels, when we talked about e-learning, it requires quite a bit of self-discipline, more than when you study in a normal classroom environment. So let's say it like this: we are now all students, and we are actually not in a real classroom, so we need to be even more disciplined with the time we allocate to the training course. It's not easy, it doesn't come by itself, but I think the benefits of all of us engaging to the extent that we can, and the time allows us, will only be greater. So I just word of encouragement to contribute to the group you are part in. And for the group leaders, a reminder that the forums are ready now. You will see you will get the links by the end of today or tomorrow, and you can already start threads, topics that you want for discussion with your group members. I think it's gonna raise the profile of our discussions, because we're gonna have more or less an open form of communication, and you can kind of channel it towards the topics you want to discuss with your group. So please make the most use of it. You will hear more about it later today. I think that's it from my side. If Heidi or Simon have something to add to that, please. And any other questions from you, or what you would like to see or see less of in the next month. Thank you very much for your attendance and for your very active involvement in this webinar. It was a pleasure having you all here, and we'll see each other in October for the next webinar. I believe on the 13th of October. But you will be anyway informed, and there will be preparation for the next webinar posted on the platforms in your groups. Until then, we'll discuss on forums and hopefully work together in our groups. Thank you and have a nice day.